Prayers.
Almighty God and Heavenly Father, send forth, we beseech thee, upon thy servants who bear office in this country, the spirit of charity and justice, that they may in all things walk before thee with steadfast purpose and a single heart, and faithfully serve in their several offices. Through Jesus Christ, O Lord. Amen. O Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive them that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. May the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ and the fellowship of the Holy Ghost be with us all now and forevermore. Amen.
The Senate is in session.
Messages from Her Excellency, the President. Announcements by Your Honor.
In terms of announcements, I have for confirmation the minutes of our last meeting, which was held on Monday, the 20th of March, 2023. Senator Cummings.
Mr. President, I beg to move the confirmation of the minutes of the March 20th meeting of the Honourable the Senate.
The question is that those minutes be confirmed. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. The the ayes have it. Those minutes are confirmed. In terms of further announcements, I have excuses of absence from Senator Dr. Hines, Senator Maladou, Senator Tate, and Senator Drakes, and an indication of late arrival from Senator Walcott, Senator Maynard, and Senator Reverend Dr. Rogers.
Presentation of petitions, presentation of papers.
Senator Cummings.
Mr. President, I am commanded to lay the following: the Public Service General Order 2023, the Public Service Teachers Order 2023, the Public Service Part-Time Order 2023, the Senate and House of Assembly Remuneration and Allowances of Members Order 2023, Ministers and Parliamentary Secretaries Remuneration and Allowances Order 2023, Judges Remuneration and Pension Salaries Order 2023, as well as the annual reports and financial statements of the Barbados Deposit Insurance Corporation for the years 2019 to 2021.
Reports from select committees. Questions to ministers. Request for leave to move the adjournment of the Senate on matters of urgent public importance. Statements by ministers or parliamentary secretaries. Personal explanations. Motions relating to the business or sitting of the Senate are moved by a minister.
Senator Cummings.
Mr. President, I beg to move the suspension of Standing Order 22-1 for the remainder of today's sitting.
The question is that Standing Order 22-1 is suspended for the remainder of today's sitting. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. The ayes have it. The Standing Order is so suspended for the remainder of today's sitting.
Introduction of bills.
Senator Cummings.
Mr. President, I am commanded today to lay the following resolutions. To give notice of the following resolution, the resolution to approve in accordance with Section 5 of the Crown Lands Vesting and Disposal Act, Cap 225, the vesting of the Home Ownership Providing Energy, otherwise known as HOPE Inc., of the parcel of land, the property of the state, situate at Hanson Plantation in the parishes of St. George, St. Michael, and Christchurch, for housing development. A resolution to approve in accordance with Section 5 of the Crown Lands Vesting and Disposal Act, Cap 225, the vesting in the National Housing Corporation of the parcel of land, property of the state, situate at Hanson Plantation in the parishes of St. George, Christchurch, for the purpose of residential and commercial development. I'm also giving notice of the following resolutions. Resolution to approve the Public Service General Order 2023, the resolution to approve the Public Service Teachers Order 2023, resolution to approve the Public Service Part-Time Orders 2023, the resolution to approve the Senate and House of Assembly Remuneration and Allowances of Members Order 2023, resolution to approve the Ministers and Parliamentary Secretaries Remuneration and Allowances Order 2023, resolution to approve in accordance with Section 3(2) of the President Conditions of Service Act, Cap 6, the amendment of the schedule to that act by deleting paragraph 1 thereof and substituting paragraph 1 as contained in the schedule to the resolution. A resolution to approve the rates of salaries and allowances applicable to the post of personal assistants to ministers as set out in the schedule. A resolution to approve the rates of salaries and allowances applicable to the post of permanent personal assistant, executive assistant, press secretary, executive personal secretary, and clerical officer to the Prime Minister as set out in the schedule.
Public business.
Public business is now the order of the day.
Order number 1, sir, which has been signed to Senator Dr. Munro, to move the passing of a resolution to approve in accordance with Section 5 of the Land Acquisition Act, Chapter 228, the compulsory acquisition by the state of the parcel of land situate at Lot 5A, Waterford, in the parish of St. Michael, in this island, for a public purpose, namely the construction of a district hospital.
Senator Dr. Monroe Knight. The clerk has come to you. Oh, sorry. Let's see.
Mr. President, I beg that this resolution for the compulsory acquisition of the land lot 5A at Waterford, St. Michael, for the construction of the geriatric hospital be taken as cognate with the other resolution of the order paper for the sale of lot 13, Lower Estate, St. Michael, to Edstrong Holdings Limited, because these two resolutions are very interrelated and linked.
The question is that order items number 1 and 2 related to the land at Lot A Waterford and land at Lot 13 Lower Estate be taken as a cognate debate. Please note the measures will be voted on separately, but all matters related will be discussed if the Honourable Senate agrees in one debate. So the question is that order items number 1 and 2 be taken as a cognate debate. Honourable Senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it. Senator Dr. Monroe-Knight, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. As you would know, Mr. President, we've had long discussions in relation to the construction of the geriatric hospital. So we'll make, Mr. President, just a brief presentation with respect to the resolutions. But first of all, to just understand why are they interrelated. So in the context of the government needed to relocate the geriatric hospital, of course, there was a search for a new site. And it so happens, Mr. President, that as the government had identified Lot 5A in Waterford and was in the process of searching for the owners of that piece of land because it was adjoining Crown lands that were already earmarked for development, that they were approached by the then firm, Mr. President, which at that particular time was called, I believe, Caribbean Consulting, in order then to acquire Lot 13A at Lower Estate. And therefore, it was just fortuitous that in the context of the Caribbean Consultant at that time also being the owners of the property identified at Lot 5A in Waterford, and they wanting as well to acquire Crown lands, that there was an agreement then for a swap of those lands, Mr. President, and therefore the interconnectedness. Mr. President, I'll just make 3 brief points in relation to the construction of the geriatric hospital and the move from the current area in Beccles Road to the Waterford area at Lot 5A. Mr. President, we've spoken quite a bit in the context of the issues of climate change and the fact that this country, given it's how we are situated, its landmass, our proximity to the coast, that there is a high vulnerability to natural disasters. And Mr. President, we note that actually where the current geriatric hospital is located is actually just 200 meters away from the coast. It means then that in the context of a severe natural disaster, that we will have to be able to relocate patients and then also as well deal with the likelihood of the damage that could occur in the context of such a natural disaster. And many may ask, why is it then that we are moving persons from Beccles Road, where geriatric hospital is currently located, into Lot 5A at Waterford, and then replacing it also with a conference facility? And I say quite simply, Mr. President, there's a big difference between a hospital, a geriatric hospital with vulnerable patients who will then have to be relocated, and a conference facility by which you can control movement, by which you can close it, by which you can make certain stipulations, and certainly in the context of modern construction, also as well be able to construct a facility that can withstand a certain degree of natural disasters. We can build it in terms of resistance to wind, hurricane level, etc. So there is a big difference, Mr. President, in saying that we are moving the geriatric hospital, but also then replacing in that same area a conference facility. The other thing I also want, Mr. President, to discuss is that there have been some suggestion that all we need to do is to be able to upgrade the current facility that exists now. The geriatric hospital was constructed, Mr. President, around the 1800s or so. And we all know and appreciate, and this is across various administrations, we have not paid close attention to the issue of maintenance and repairs. So many of the government buildings that we have are falling into disrepair. And we have to make that cost-benefit analysis, that hard choice And there are two ways that we can look at it, Mr. President. We can say, is it that we can repair the geriatric hospital or construct a new one, perhaps at the same price? Is that an option? Is it, Mr. President, that we can say, for instance, that we can repair the current geriatric hospital and pay more money for a new one? That's the choices, Mr. President, we have in terms of the cost-benefit analysis. And we can apply that, Mr. President, to our own lives. I'm a woman. I like my outfits and, to look nice. And if I'm going somewhere, there's a choice. I can say, for instance, Mr. President, I may go to a seamstress, but that may cost me materials. I gotta buy buttons. I gotta buy all the other things. I have to buy those, pay her, and then there's time for her to be able to make it. And I may say, you know what? That same money I can take and I can go buy a dress because that's easier. But there may be another circumstance in which I say, you know what? It makes sense for me to spend more money in order to be able to get something that is unique, fit for the purpose that I want. Yeah, and then I may turn out, Mr. President, to be the only one wearing it, and that's always a plus. And in that context, Mr. President, we have to make those hard decisions. And particularly when we look at the current geriatric hospital site, there are a number of challenges with that building that makes sense for us in order to ensure that we have a facility that is going to be fit for purpose, Mr. President, for our elderly citizens in order for the government to invest in the build-out of a new facility. And Mr. President, I do want to be able to identify some of those challenges because I think that it's important that we fully understand the context in which we are making this move and looking to construct this new facility. One, as I said before, we have this age plant from the 1800s. There has been increasing cost over the last couple of years in terms of maintenance. And we know that would happen. You have old electrical systems, old plumbing systems, and sometimes it's not always possible to continue to repair in the context, like I said before, the cost-benefit analysis of, again, doing something completely new. Because when you try to add new measures on top of what is existing, then the old infrastructure cannot withstand it. In that context, Mr. President, that is one of the big challenges that we have with the current site, is that the infrastructure itself cannot lend itself easily to the build-up that is necessary for us to make sure that we have a fit-for-purpose geriatric hospital. And when I say a fit-for-purpose geriatric hospital, Mr. President, I'm talking about a space in which we are not just housing the elderly, putting them in rooms, but a space that is expansive, that allows them to be able to have therapy, allow them to be able to look at some greenery, allow them, Mr. President, to be able to feel that they are in an atmosphere that they can have some dignity as they age. One of the other issues, Mr. President, is also about the need to expand. And that was also critical in terms of identifying a space for the new geriatric hospital. Currently, the geriatric hospital has less than 300 beds. I think we have approximately 224 persons, and the entire plant can hold about 278 persons. The intent is that at the new site, we're able in 2 phases to build out more rooms to be able to hold patients, so that we are already then expanding, Mr. President, based on the fact that there is increasing demand for such services within the context of the geriatric hospital, so that we are also then addressing the need for increased space because of the increased demand in the context of the elderly. And Mr. President, I think that there has been ongoing conversations nationally about the fact that we do have an issue in terms of our population growth. We have an increasingly elderly population because we've done so well in the context of our social services. And actually, when we look at the stats, Barbados has not necessarily replaced its population since the 1980s. And therefore, when we have a growing elderly population, we have to make sure that we think about the future in terms of their needs, what it will look like, and in terms of the requirements in terms of plant facilities. I want to say here, Mr. President, as well, that again, some may ask, where are we focusing just on this site in the context of the Beccles Road geriatric facility, when there are other geriatric facilities as well that are also in need of repair. So I want to indicate, Mr. President, that the Ministry of Health and Wellness has a comprehensive plan for the upgrade of those facilities. If we look at the Appropriations Act that was passed in this House, in this chamber, Mr. President, very recently, we would know that in the context of that head for the Ministry of Health and Wellness, and particularly in the context of the sub-program for the geriatric hospital, that there was an increase in the vote for maintenance and repairs. So the urgency in the context of prioritizing the Beccles Road facility, again, as I said, has to do with the fact that not only is it an aged plant in need of significant upgrade that we can't necessarily build on the current infrastructure, it is also as well in the close environment to the coast and therefore vulnerable to natural disasters, sea surge, etc. So that is the focus in relation to looking at this plant, but it does not mean that the government is unaware of or is not paying attention to the needs to upgrade other facilities as well, Mr. President. Mr. President, the final thing I want to say is in terms of looking at some of the challenges in relation to the geriatric hospital and care of the elderly just generally is, again, we have a change in population dynamic. Where before we had persons that would be willing, family members, be willing to look after their elderly. That's not the case, unfortunately. I think we're all aware of the stories in respect of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, where we unfortunately have elderly patients that are, and I'll use a very unpleasant word, of dumped there by their families and never turn back up to care for them. And there are a number of beds within to take them away, rather. We have a number of beds in the hospital that are currently occupied by elderly patients that are not significantly unwell, but they remain there because family members are not willing to take them home. And in the context of that, we have this move to provide more beds. But I also want to make the point, Mr. President, that the government is also as well future planning. So again, we're not saying that even in the context of providing more bed space for patients when we move to the Waterford space, that is the be-all and end-all of it. We understand that the geriatric hospital, again, because we have a growing elderly population, will not be able to fill demand. And therefore, the government, even as dealing with that particular problem, we are also as well looking to roll out a more comprehensive community care program. As you would know, the government in the context of COVID had identified community health liaison officers that help the elderly. But we want to go even further, Mr. President, to be able to look at identifying persons within the communities that will be willing on an ongoing basis to be able to check in, to be able to deal with their basic needs, so that rather than having to go to geriatric hospital or even private care, that we can have our elderly staying within their homes and having that support that they need. So we are looking at this, Mr. President, a number of different pillars. I can speak as well in the context of the Ministry of People's Empowerment and their work there in the context of elder abuse legislation that we've been speaking about, which is critical as well to addressing the needs of the elderly to be able to age with grace and with dignity as well. The issue of elder abuse comes about for a number of various issues. One, people are frustrated within their homes and not knowing how to properly care. So those are some of the issues, Mr. President, that we might have. Mr. President, I was a caregiver for quite some time. My dad, unfortunately, became immobilized, although he is relatively young, due to an accident. And I understand how can be in terms of taking care of family members over a prolonged period of time. And that doesn't necessarily excuse the elder abuse, but again, the government will be trying to address it by providing support to those families, providing respite facilities, for instance, Mr. President, so that caregivers as well can have some time to step away, and then people within the community can take on some of those responsibilities so that you can create some distance and give some people time to cool off and to come back. So it's a comprehensive approach that is being designed, and the Ministry of Health and Wellness will be rolling out that particular campaign in order, one, to deal with the infrastructural issues, but also as well working in tandem with the Ministry of People's Empowerment as well to deal with the social and welfare context of how we address care to the elderly. So finally, Mr. President, to wrap up, I hope that we will have support for this resolution, which is extremely important. And I want to identify that even in the context of this build-out, Mr. President, that we are seeking to make sure that in the context of building a fit-for-purpose facility, that some of the current issues that we have with making sure that we have adequate water to be able to supply the geriatric hospital. And I want to, Mr. President, if you would allow me to go through some of the new things that we will be doing in the context of the build-out as well. So that, for instance, Mr. President, we will be having on-site wastewater sewage treatment facilities and storage tanks to allow for the tertiary treatment of wastewater reuse, to make sure that, again, we maintain the integrity and the protection of the water zoning in that area. The collection of rooftop water to be stored in holding tanks for reuse, and excess treated water will be further treated by natural processes, Mr. President. There will be plans made for excess water flows, the use of solar heating and photovoltaics on the roof where necessary. So I'm hoping, Mr. President, you're seeing that we are not just intending to say that we will have a new facility, but again, make sure that the facility, one, is purpose-built for a more facilitatory process of aging and being able to take care of the elderly, but also as well to ensure that we imbue within the building all of the necessary things to future-proof it as well. So, Mr. President, in the context of the land swap that we have done, I just want to also indicate that at the time of the land swap, as I would have indicated, we would have been approached by Caribbean Consultants Limited in relation to the purchase of the 6 acres at Laura Estate. But at the time of the sale, they then came back to us and indicated that there had been a change in the name of the company, and therefore, Mr. President, that sale now is being done to Edstrong Holdings Limited, as indicated in the resolution. And Edstrong Holdings Limited is a company that is involved in the area of real estate, and they are looking to develop that 6 acres at Laura Estate in order then to further build out their business and their business model, which itself can also add then to future employment, etc. for Barbados. So, Mr. President, with those few words, and begging the support of all within this chamber for these 2 resolutions, given the importance, particularly in the context of the construction of the new geriatric hospital. I beg to move that the resolution be now passed.
Senator Herod.
Thank you, Mr. President, for recognizing me. I know that the former Speaker, Senator Chantal Monroe-Knight, Minister, has made a very wonderful presentation, has been very detailed with respect to this resolution. And, sir, as a result of that, it really means that I will not belabor the particular points that she's made, but I thought it to be very important that I made this contribution against the backdrop of a high degree of responsibility for topics pertaining to enhancing our healthcare system in order to provide for the elderly, sir. Sir, I find discussions on old age for quite a while to be fascinating. That is the term that is constantly used, old age. If my wife were here to account for my intrigue, she would probably tell this chamber that I bombard her ears on a constant basis about what I intend to do 30 years from now in terms of my routine, sir. We're currently building in in Gibbon Star, sir, in a location that overlooks lots of agricultural land. And I often envision myself waking up on mornings, having a juice and watching the sunrise, and then going over to the balcony on the western side and watching the sunset. And I told her, you have control of me throughout the entire day, but just allow me between 6 and 6:30 to watch the sunrise, and probably between 5:30 and 6 to watch the sunset. So, sir, I've always been fascinated when it comes to what is going to happen after a number of years of service. I have a thirst for knowledge, sir, and I have a great appreciation for those who preserve it and are willing to pass it on, sir. Even when I look around this chamber today, sir, I treasure the wide variety of experiences and the wide variety of knowledge from which we are here as relatively young people to harvest this information from the chamber, sir. In particular, I favor knowledge that is continuously transferred and that becomes permanent fixtures in our society. Case in point, sir, it was only last week in a chamber very similar to this one that we were having lunch, and I overheard a piece of history that I had to research. And through that knowledge, sir, a reflection of a former prime minister in the Commonwealth standing on a platform and promising persons, if he were to be elected, that he would build a shoe factory, sir. And that type of knowledge, sir, is something that I took away, went and did some research, found it to be relatively true. And it was interesting that it was made as a pledge against the backdrop of a number of persons walking around the island who were barefooted. And if not for that conversation, I would not have known about this promise made and promise not delivered, sir. But more to my point, sir, I have an unimaginably high regard for the largest natural repository of knowledge, which is our elderly. So it pains me, sir, when we hear about matters about abandonment, whether it be structured abandonment where you place the elderly in a home, you're paying for them when the month comes, but you're not checking in to see the condition. Whether it be unstructured abandonment, where, as we know, sometimes persons are dropped off at institutions, never to be collected, and then becomes what some describe as a burden on the taxpayers. I don't say it as a burden, but essentially it is not done the right way. And this is something that cannot obtain going forward, sir. We are all going to be elderly, sir, at some point. Each and every one of us, sir, in this chamber. For sure, God willing. So it's against this backdrop, sir, that I give my full support to this resolution, which seeks to ensure continuity and enhancement of the government's geriatric services. There was discussion as well on location, sir, and based on modern practices for what is called assisted living in different countries, the provision for physical space to help reduce the rate of the deterioration of some of the mental faculties is often cited to be associated with aging, sir. Space allows for exercising, a lessening of the feeling of constraint, and studies have shown that green spaces tend to provide better results than areas with an underlying industrial field where you have all the concrete pavings and stuff. The presence of trees and plants and animals, sir, it does wonders at normalizing what I imagine is a stressful scenario of being taken from your place of comfort, which is home, to a new environment such as a geriatric facility, and meeting persons for the first time you've never met in your life, some of whom will take care of you and some of whom will become your comrades into the sunset, sir. Sir, this can be a very stressing process. If space is a necessity and green space adds huge benefits, then I cannot think of a better place to pay respect to some of those who helped to build this nation than there in the Botanical Garden, sir. Sir, it is no secret that this popular space is becoming increasingly popular. When you pass on there on weekends, you see a number of families out there enjoying the environs and different activities like recreation. If there's one thing that I can add with respect to the location, just as not a huge deviation, but also an addition, we're coming up to the crop over season, sir, and I think it would be of great benefit, and I know there are plans to demarcate certain areas allocate certain areas of geriatric, depending on the type of flora that is in the grounds. But it would be good to have a more formalized navigational system, so that if you're going to hold the event on one part, you can say you're going to have an event on this part or the other. I'll leave the characterization of the naming system to the professionals. Whether it's north, east, south, or west, whether it is A, B, C, or D, based on plants, whatever the location, sir. I would even, sir, support a notion to demarcate these areas based on past leaders. You can have a Thompson area, we can have a Barrow area, we can have a Motley area, Arthur area, we can have an Adams area, Sahara area, sir, we can even have a Stewart area, but I suspect that might be the silent zone. That's silent zone, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Let's move on from there, sir. Of course. Sir, I want to express my unbridled sincerity to all of the elderly who have done what they had to do to allow this country to constantly progress against all odds. Now, let us be practical. Some did less than others in relative terms, but we salute all of them equally and collectively for putting us where we are today, sir. From those who headed our central banks, from those who cut canes to ensure that we generate foreign exchange during preferential arrangements with the EU, and to those who continue to feed the nation, sir, and work even in our fish market, sir. We salute all of them. Sir, I want to see us continue to enhance our assisted living program across Barbados. Ideally, I know that many would love to see their loved ones actually reside at home through those wonderful years of their life. And obviously, financial constraints may not necessarily permit for that, sir. But I'm hoping, based on the comments by Senator Monroe Knight, and she did mention allowing persons in the community to partake in that elderly care program, I'm hoping that we can extend it similarly to what is done in Germany as well. Not only elderly persons or mid-aged persons taking care of elderly, but also the increased interaction with young people as well. And I think this communication loop opens the door for a transfer of knowledge, not only from persons at the elderly stage to middle age to young, but directly from the elderly stage to young as well, because they all have something to learn, sir. Sir, I must say that there's not much more that I can say with respect to this resolution, apart from the fact that I wholeheartedly salute it. I salute the fact that we are showing, by way of the resolution, that we as a government respect the elderly, and that we are going to project what is a necessary layer of protection for those who may not be in a position to continuously protect themselves against all odds, including economic odds. If we do not take this step today, sir, we may be guilty of neglecting duties as a government, and as you and all persons in Barbados know, sir, it is highly unlikely that you can be formally declared guilty and informally declared innocent at the same time. And we do not want to find ourselves as a government where we are formally declared guilty for anything, sir. And I would like to say with those few words that I am in full support of this resolution, and I look forward to the build-up of the geriatrics, sir.
Her Honour Senator Thompson.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I rise to support this resolution, to support the government for what is an excellent initiative. There is no doubt that we need increased facilities and larger facilities for care of our elderly population. Those of us who are engaged at the political level will know that we get calls very, very frequently asking us to help people get their relatives and their senior members of the family and their parents, sir, and I'm sure you are, having been a member of parliament yourself, that you get these calls asking to help us get people into the national geriatric facilities where the care of the elderly is normally at quite a high standard. And I would wish to thank and congratulate all of those in public and other facilities who work in the care of the elderly, because it isn't until my own mom became very ill and I came home, that I recognized really how very difficult it is to care for elderly persons, knowing that there is no coming back, you know, and for people to do it all day, every day, and to do it with love and to make those seniors feel valued still and cared for is really very important. So I pay tribute to those who are caregivers to the elderly. I want to make some broader comments on this matter of elderly care, Mr. President, and I start with the fact that people keep saying that Barbados is an aging population, and if you walk down the street, you see it. If you observe, the majority of people, sir, look like you and me in our age group and up. So we are a senior or an aging population, and I have to admit I'm 6 years from the official retirement age, so I'm getting up there, sir, even though it shocks me every time I contemplate it, and even though when I look in the mirror I see somebody who is significantly younger, but that may be some delusion or some hope on my part, sir, but the reality is the numbers do not lie. Barbados has a general life expectancy of 80.9 years, 79.6 for women, and 78.4 for men. Now that number alone puts us into the profile of developed countries rather than developing countries. The reality is that Barbados has the largest aging population in the Caribbean and one of the most elderly populations across the globe. That is the reality. To give the statistics, sir, in 1973, our elderly population was at 8.4%. Today, it has doubled to 16.3 as of 2022, with about 48,000 people, so just under 50,000 people in Barbados. And if you think of that as a percentage of the population, it is not insubstantial. In fact, if you do the raw maths, it would appear to be higher than what the official statistics say. 4.7% of the Barbados population is 75 years and older, as compared with 2 to 3% in the rest of the Caribbean. So that gives you immediately some clear picture of the great gap and the demographic profile. And more than 17% of our population is over 55. This raises the issue, sir, as to the level, while this initiative is excellent and I congratulate the government, it does raise the issue of what is our general policy and planning in respect of elderly care, which is a growing issue. It is not going to get smaller, it is going to get bigger, and it is going to get bigger in several regards. Let me start with the fact that the major causes of morbidity and mortality are death and disability, or, sir, and I'm using various nouns for the benefit of our listeners, of those who are dead and those who are going to suffer bad ailments and not be able to walk around, get out the house, and so on, sir. The major causes in the cohort that is now becoming the largest percentage of the population as a single group are the NCDs, strokes, heart attacks, cancer, and related diseases, which are taking more than 60% of the cost of health care in Barbados. If you think of that then as a growing number, it gives you some idea of the kind of costs that we are facing down the road. And we have to start in terms of thinking of what our broad planning parameters are going to be, what are the full implications for healthcare and for the QEH and for the healthcare system generally, how we are going to manage these numbers, because we can't put all of them into facilities and host care, how we are going to manage these numbers, and what our broad planning projections are, not only in terms of the numbers, but in terms of the options. Sir, with every challenge, there is also opened up opportunities. If there is a large section of the population that is old and getting older and need care, then it means that there are opportunities for us to train people in geriatric and elderly care. We need geriatricians. I think there are only now 2 doctors who are trained in geriatric care and specializing in practice in Barbados. If you want an appointment for an elderly person, you cannot get it because the demand on them is so great. We will need people like podiatrists, specialist geriatric nurses. We will need nutritionists and people who are specialized in care of the elderly, psychology and psychiatry, because they have a whole range of problems, including dementia, Alzheimer's, problems related to loneliness and abandonment, problems related to the fears which they face of aging, loss of independence and death, and they need care and support. How is the government, in a situation where we are clearly under financial pressures, going to provide the gamut of skills and services? Are these going to be something that government will subsidize but will largely be given by private sector entities? For young people who are coming out of school, what areas of specialization and training can they go into for which there will be high demand? Young people coming out of school do not think of elderly care as a natural career option. But in Barbados, in the context of our population growth, and where the growth is taking place, or sorry, where the aging is taking place, then that is an obvious area for young people to go and train in the range of subspecialties. It is possible, sir, and I know too that a number of people who are entrepreneurial, there is no, let me put it the other way, come at it from the different angle. There is no one-stop shop facility in Barbados for the elderly care. And I'm suggesting to those who are entrepreneurs that instead of building just bricks and mortar places like apartments and hoping somebody will rent them, build a complete geriatric care facility. You walk in, you are able to see your psychiatrist or psychologist, you are able to have your toenails done, because very often arthritis in the hands or legs prevents the elderly from cutting, simple things like cutting their toenails. You can go in if you want, and I wouldn't call it a spa day, but sir, you know, right now, as you age, you know, there are parts of your back that you don't reach as you reached before. So you could go in and you know, have a nice bath and have your hair combed and be well cared for. You can go in there, you can get your medicine. It has some kind of gentle exercise facility. You can go and have somebody watch a movie with others, have people read to you. There are a whole range of services. There are also services that need to be delivered in the context of the home. A lot of elderly people do not like to go out. Groceries should be delivered to them. Medication should be delivered to them. Somebody should come in and check to make sure that they are taking their medicines, that the house is getting cleaned properly. As their vision and energy levels decline, they can't, you know, it takes a lot to really maintain and clean a home properly, you know, those kinds of services. So there is a huge scope for people who are entrepreneurial to really specialize in the full gamut of elderly care with support and incentivization from the government of Barbados, recognizing that there is a clear opening opportunity, but beyond that, those the opening and opportunity are really driven by the level of need which exists. The same thing for provision of meals. they become, as they age, it becomes difficult for them to deal with gas and gas bottles. Have they left on the stove? Did they switch it on? Are they lighting the match? All kinds of things that puts elderly people at risk. And this is a bigger issue in Barbados than you would think, because, sir, the statistics show that about, I think it is something like 40% of those who are elderly live alone. Think about that for a moment. They live alone. Many of them, and it is a tribute, I think, to Barbados's socioeconomic landscape, that many of the elderly, even those whom we think of as poor, live in their own homes. And I think that is a significant bit of information. And I'm speaking to research on the elderly done in Barbados, from which I drew the statistics and information. But with the elderly living at home, that then again creates a need for people to be able to check on them, to find out how they are doing. It also means, when you look at the range of vulnerabilities which these elderly people have, that there is an urgent need for legislation which protects the elderly in every way, socially, financially, from financial abuse, from sexual abuse, and other types of abuse which the elderly in Barbados and over the rest of the Caribbean and the world suffer. So that is something, again, at which we are going to have to look. We talk about the abandonment of the elderly at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital and other government facilities. The reality is that sometimes people do not have the support needed to care for their elderly. They have to work during the days, they come home at night, and they cannot leave the old people by themselves. So it isn't that they want to abandon them, it is that the facilities and the structures to help them care for their elderly do not exist. And this is where, again, government or other organizations within the society can intervene in order to give them the kinds of support that they need. That is, I think, of extreme importance. And that level of support would go a long way, in my view, to taking some of the people out of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. If we allowed for facilities which provided daycare, respite care, which allowed caregivers themselves to get a break, because the burden on the caregivers is enormous. If we allowed them to get a break, then that would enable them or support them in providing, our families in providing, the kind of care which the elderly need. My final point, Mr. President, sir, and there are two, is one, I think we have to look at extending the age of retirement. The reality is that at 67, at 60, even at 70, a lot of people in Barbados are in good physical and mental shape. They have a wealth of experience, and these are things which can help to enhance the workplace, and therefore extending the retirement age would really be of great value. I think finally, sir, government needs to incentivize and encourage other organizations to also build facilities, including daycare centers, and we salute the Seroptimists and others for the work that they have done over the years in providing daycare and support services for the elderly, but we should incentivize other groups to do so. Daycare, support for caregivers, and respite care facilities. Stakeholders like the credit unions who have large memberships, who are becoming older, trade unions, churches, etc., are all organizations which can be incentivized to produce or to provide some level of daycare and support for the elderly. So those are sir, the points that I wanted to make in respect of this matter, while congratulating the government on this resolution and this initiative, because it is something that is much needed, and I think it is a great location up there where they will have a salubrious environment, not in the congestion of urban Barbados. So congratulations to the government, and maybe, sir, who knows, that somebody might visit me there one of these days.
Senator Dr. Brathwaite.
Good morning, and thank you, Mr. President, for recognizing me. I thank you for the opportunity to say a few words on this particular bill, this particular resolution today, which fundamentally seeks to address the issue of care and attention to the aging population in our country. I support the proposal in principle because it is fundamental to us as we move forward as a country to ensure that those who are in the evening of their years have the care, the support, and the attention of a caring government and a caring society. It is clear from the remarks made by our Deputy President that our population is aging, and she gave statistics which show that in 1973, those over 65 years old was just 8.3%, and that number has increased in 2022 to 16.3%. And indications are that by 2050, the population over 60 will be considerable. I saw a figure some time ago of about 60%. But, Mr. President, in my view, this is not all about a hospital. This is about a policy, an attitude, and a seriousness about taking care of our society from birth to death. Not only must we take care of the young children, we must take care of the middle class, but we must also take care of our aging population because of the contribution that they can make to the development of our society and economy. There are those who believe that after you pass 65 and you're retired, that's the end of your time. There's evidence to show that people over 65 have made great contributions to the world in science, in technology, in investment, in knowledge, contribution to societies around the world. And I'm sure there are a lot of examples that could be placed on the table, and I do not wish to go into details on this. So that I hope that this is only part of the government policy for the aging. A hospital is normally a place for curative measures. I believe that the government must also emphasize preventative measures before you get to the hospital. Healthy living, healthy nutrition, exercise, and the whole question of a society that is based on promoting healthy mental states is important. Recreation, sports, music, the creative arts as contributors to healthy living, in my view, must also be emphasized. Mr. President, this aging population, in my view, must be seen as a contribution to our development, and not as a burden. Aging people mentor the youth. They teach fading skills that could disappear if they're not taught to the young. They share wisdom. But more importantly, Mr. Chairman or Mr. President, they maintain the values of the society. And the maintenance of the values of our society is very important. In recent times, we've heard a lot about lack of values, lack of respect, how people treat each other in our society, the need for better care with respect to our neighbors. It is the age that brings these values and help to preserve them in our society. It is the age that influence the behavior of the young. It is those with the experience, those who have matured and who have passed through difficult times that can share those experiences with the young people and let them know that in spite of the emphasis today on a get-rich-quick and fast life, that fundamentally the slow processes of life must be respected and understood in order to preserve our society and for the sustainability of who we are. I believe, therefore, that initiatives such as this must be supported. Just recently, I was watching a program on the television that spoke to the benefits of an initiative called YES, Youth Entrepreneurship Scheme. And I said to myself as I watched it, what about an entrepreneurship scheme for the old? Why only the young? Isn't there the possibility that young people, that there are old people out there with entrepreneurship capacity? Not only in the context of providing services for the aged, which our Deputy President mentioned, geriatric services, food and help and accompaniment and those things, but also that the old people may have ideas that they would like to implement. So there should be a fund for the aged too for entrepreneurship, so that they too, in their older stage of life, can do something productive with their time that contribute to the society and also help to create jobs. So, in other words, Mr. President, let us not write off our old people. They are a resource that we should treasure. They can help to preserve the values of the society. They can contribute wisdom and knowledge to our young people. They can help to promote entrepreneurial activities. And they are important consumers also. They buy products. They help to stimulate the economy. And therefore, they are important to our development. I believe that going forward, there should be a specific policy for the aged, specific facilities for the aged, not only hospitals, places for recreation, places for education, places for art, places for creativity, where the aged can express their creative potential in collaboration with the schools, in collaboration with the community centers, wherever they may be, so that those talents that they have honed over the years and that they have can be expressed, and we can have a richer community. Finally, Mr. President, I believe that we are at a stage where we can give more to our aging population. The hospital as a place for care and the promotion and taking care of those who are not well is important. But more important, we need a policy that gives the aged a healthy lifestyle and a place of care and concern as they get older. Because as my colleague mentioned, at some point in time, all of us will get old. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Dr. Bradford. Reverend Dr. Rogers. Senator Reverend Dr. Rogers.
Good afternoon, Mr. President and fellow senators, and thank you very much for this opportunity to share in this discussion debate on this most important resolution. It would have been a grave omission for me not to at least say something on this resolution. As I've mentioned before, nothing can be too good for our elderly, and to be actually at the cusp of having a new facility for them to care for them in their latter years is something we should all celebrate as a people of a progressive nation. I share with Senator Brathwaite, as he said, this is not about a hospital. It's about policy. It's about our care as a people for the other. And it really ties into something that I would have spoken about on the last occasion when I had the opportunity to speak in this place, where I spoke about national development, that there are some things that are apolitical, something that go beyond what politics can bring to the fore. And I believe that this geriatric hospital, this new facility, is one such thing, because if memory serves me well, I believe that this was in train under the administration somewhere between 2008 and 2018. So it just shows that our maturity as a people to recognize those things that are important and are necessary for national development. And in this light, I wish to commend the government for taking this up. I mean, there are many excuses that can be made for not doing it at this point, but it just shows that in Barbados, above everything else, we have a deep care and concern for what others are going through, and particularly our elderly who have served this nation so well over the years. I was rather pleased when Senator Harewood mentioned that we should name some places up there after past leaders, but when he started, he stopped after a while and he had only mentioned two from another party. But I have those signed there. And it just shows the bipartisan nature of our politics here and what the things we care about. So I wish to commend Senator Harewood on his forward thinking as well. Sir, today's a very special day in the church for us as Anglicans. It is the day we remember the life, work, and witness of John Keble, a member of what was known as the Oxford Movement, one who cared very much for the church and its tradition. But one of the things that John Keble also cared for was the Christian year, and how the Christian year sort of married what was taking place on the outside. A reminder to us as human beings that we are very much a part of nature. And as Senator Brathwaite just pointed out, it is a part of the course of life, and even as we age, there are things that we can still contribute to national development. And as I was thinking about that, it reminded me of an analogy I drew some time before of the river. You know, the river has different stages. There's the youthful stage when it blazes a trail down the mountain, cutting everything in its path. And then there's the middle stage where it meanders. When it encounters obstacles, it learns how to get around them. But then there's the old stage. And the old stage is usually the richest part of the river, because that is when it begins to deposit everything that has accumulated over time. And I believe that when we think about what we're doing for our elderly here, we're not just doing it for them, but we're doing it for the society, because these people can still contribute much wisdom to us to help us to navigate some of the quagmire of life that will present itself as time goes by. And so nothing can be too good for them. I will support anything that will go towards making their lives as comfortable as possible. As I say that, in my capacity as a minister of religion, I would advocate for a chapel at the geriatric hospital. You know, sometimes you have to go there to visit members, and they're more than one of your community there, and rather than going to every bed, you can have a little space where you can keep a little service for them, because these people, what we're trying to do is to make them feel as at home as possible. And many of those people in the geriatric hospital, their faith, they're the people who built the foundation of faith of this society. And in their latter years, you go there and sometimes you can't minister to them in the way you would want to, because you don't want to disturb someone else or something else is happening next door. So perhaps a little chapel which can be used by all religious entities that go there and gather their people, so that they can have that familiarity with their faith as well, sing some of the hymns that they know, recite some of the prayers, because many of the people I visit, some of them experience what we call dementia or Alzheimer's, but it is strange, sir, that you would go to these people and you begin a prayer and they can complete it. They can't remember much more, but they can complete that prayer. And it really goes back to what the writer of Ecclesiastes would have said in Ecclesiastes 12:1. Remember your Creator in the days of your youth. These are the people that were so grounded in their faith that even in their latter years, as their memory fades, they can still remember those prayers. It's almost like it's written within them. And so I would advocate for a place where we can gather and have them sing some of their hymns and go through some of their liturgy that they know so well, so that they feel even more at home at a time when, as Senator Harewood said, it can be extremely stressful being moved away from everything that was familiar to you, away from family in a new community. At least that would be something, one of many ways that can make their lives better and more comfortable in that facility. So once again, I wish to commend the government for this initiative. And as I said, I'll support anything that makes life more comfortable for our elderly. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Senator Reverend Dr. Rogers. No more speakers. Senator Kevin Boyce.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. President. I'm somewhat surprised at the paucity of contributions, because this is such, let me finish my statement. I was somewhat surprised at the paucity of contributions seeing my arrival, and I hope my excuse was conveyed to I had to be released from another place. So I thought that I would still have to wait until the swath or the entirety of the chamber had made their contribution. So maybe they have and I didn't hear it. For my part, sir, this is something which I was very interested in hearing the discourse, and I couldn't listen to it where I was, because you're not allowed to have radios while you're in that place, sir. But this is the issue that I have, sir. The issue that I have, and I find it interesting to talk about policy. And I think it fits within the overarching policy. And what is the beauty about this, sir, is when you're able to debate and take contributions while still continuing our message, that's how we do it. So let's talk about the policy and how this fits in with the frame of what the government's intention is. For the purposes of the debate, sir, when we look at the legislative statement with regard to the parliamentary bill which is before us in terms of the resolution, simply worded, to approve the compulsory acquisition by the state of the parcel at land at 5A Waterford in the parish of St. Michael, more particularly describing the schedule for public purpose, namely the construction of a district hospital. I don't think, sir, that there's anyone who could doubt the need for a district hospital, certainly for the purposes, stated purposes of the geriatric care. Sir, the government currently has a system through the National Assistance Board where persons who are elderly are provided, I believe, care. I'm sure I'll be corrected if I misspeak, but I think they get assistance 5 days out of 7. And to me, sir, when I heard about it, I was very impressed. I can't remember when it was initiated, but I think it has been with us for a while. And it shows the concept of caring for those who do not have. And we have heard the Prime Minister reiterate that that is an important segment of the Barbadian way of life and something that has to be continued. The other initiative I'm also aware of, sir, is the transitory, I may have the term wrong, the transitory outreach program, where persons who have left the hospital are thereby followed up on a weekly basis or bi-weekly in some cases to make sure, and I believe that was a recent initiative, sir, to make sure that persons are still taking their medication, they're having their bandages changed, and that they are being attended to as soundly as possible. So these are the type of initiatives which show the consistency and the care for those in the population as they go up. Now, the narrative that I would assume is being made is that this fits within that policy and the construction of such a hospital is part and parcel of the same, Mr. President. So as we go into an examination, sir, of why the resolution is important, the stated objective, I'm sure the issue of course, the abandonment of patients at the QEH has been addressed, and it was certainly set out in the Well of Parliament recently, sir, that this continues to be a problem. Many countries have grappled with it. Some have sought legislative solutions. Some have sought to rely on cultural practices. But the question that remains is, it is a reality that we have to deal with, and how do we deal with these persons? We have a situation now where the St. Lucie District Hospital is currently being utilized so as to free up space within the QEH, and I'm sure the issues with regard to the QEH and space and resources have been adequately ventilated, sir. Now, where does this come from? Someone once told me when I was having an argument as to, well, we don't have time to look at where a problem comes from when you're in the middle of solving a problem. That was my response. I said, well, we don't have to look at why. Let's just solve the problem and we'll look at why later. And in the rejoinder, it was, but if we don't look at it when the iron is hot, after we have solved the problem, we've moved on to the next one. Because there's always a crisis and an obligation for government that has to govern. But we have to ask ourselves, why do we have this situation with our elderly? Why are persons being abandoned? What is the socio-economic and cultural, philosophical, even religious concept that gets us to this point? Some might say that it harkens back to the time in our history, sir, where if you were not of a certain ability and utilization, you were abandoned because you couldn't serve the purpose for whence you were there. But certainly we have evolved since that, haven't we, Mr. President? Haven't we? And then there was some who say, well, no, maybe they deserve it because of how they treated persons and how they treated their family members. So I guess we don't bother to turn the other cheek, Mr. President. We punish those who have done us wrong when they reach a certain age. Is that where we are as a society, Mr. President? At the end of the day, it is not necessarily one of these answers that will jump out, but it is a problem that we have to deal with. So we could build as many hospitals. Eventually they will be filled because it continues unless while we build the hospitals, we look at addressing the socio-economic and cultural reasons that we have this elderly abandonment issue. That's the first point. Let me repeat it again. We can build as many hospitals as we can afford. However, unless we address the sociological and cultural, even economical reasons for it, it will continue to increase, sir. So it has to be a two-pronged attack, as it were, sir. Sir, the other issue, and I'm currently dealing with an interesting personal experience, sir, is that as you age, and I think most of us in here could experience having to deal with elderly members of family, I was speaking to someone who was involved in the transitional program. So it's anecdotal and not scientifically based, and I always like to make these disclaimers, but it's true. And the individual said that the persons who have family members to assist them after they suffer hardships like stroke, or some, heaven forbid, amputation for diabetes, or some form of serious medical intervention, the persons who have family members around to encourage them, for them to eat properly, to give them a little love-ups, to tell them a story, to care for them, tend to recover faster than those who are left. So they may be out the hospital, they may be getting the visit from the transitory workers, but that's I think that's once a week, while NAB comes every day. 5 days out of the 7. But the persons who have the family members around are often able to do better than those who are just left by themselves. So how do we deal with that disparity? Do we just say that it is the luck of the draw? Or do we seek to create? Do we seek to improve? Because we have to recognize that we as a country have a significant social mesh. We have a significant social mesh, but it comes at a price. The cost of living index is up at 140, whatever, 150, whatever. So it is so interesting when we get into this dialogue as to the price that we pay for this social support. And if we don't pay the price of the social support, do we then suffer the plagues that come when you remove the social safety net, sir? These are thoughts, sir. Sir, I heard comments with regard to, I would call it, by Senator Brathwaite with relation to the utilization and the support of the entrepreneurial needs of those who are, I believe the term is when you're in your 60s, it's a sextagarian or words to that effect, with lots of sextagarian, lots of 60s. So, sir, the situation is that is an issue. In other words, we just had a situation where I would have made a contribution the last time we were here to say, well, can we open the door for the government rebranding and retraining, and why cap it at the age 35? We recognize the value of youth, but perhaps joined by now my brother, Senator Brathwaite, that we look at drawing on the well of experience that we have. Because another issue that we speak to, sir, is that because how life is, we forget those who have done stuff in the past because we are here in the present. And they remain amongst us. They remain amongst us a source of wisdom and guidance that is often untapped. I personally, sir, draw from it. I pick up the phone and call certain persons, sir. I call certain persons, talk with them, see how they're doing, get a little insight. I call them my wise men. And sometimes they lament that those who ought to reach out to them don't. And I think if I could encourage Barbadians to pick up the phone and reach out to family members, colleagues, persons in your neighborhood that you know who have experienced life, they may be able to give you a little guidance. Certainly times have changed, but certain problems never do. I've heard the Deputy President speak to the issue of increasing the age of pensions. And I believe certainly there would be a standing on a point of order if I get it incorrect, but I believe the point that was being made was that the persons as they get up in age certainly have stuff to contribute. So should we be marching them out of the workplace at such a young age in their 60s? Have I caught it correctly? I see it. It seems I have. Now, of course, with everything, arguments and balance, we currently see now that in other places, thank God not Barbados, that they're burning down the streets because the pension age has been increased, the pensionable age. We are a different society. I believe we're at 67 for ours, and we have received indications that that may go up. Now, a point that has also been raised in relation to the judicial considerations is that is there a need in the Constitution that's being considered to look at the age? I believe it's 70, can be extended to 72. Should that be increased, sir? Or should that remain? This is what the scientists would have to guide us on, sir, as to the capabilities. We see the situation in the U.S. Supreme Court where they stay there until they can't stay, sir. You understand? So where we'll go, I'm sure Senator Nichols will be able to guide us as to where we land on that point. But certainly the principle is, how can we utilize those in our society who have learned and have the ability to contribute? But sir, before I go, I certainly would like to raise certain questions, and if they have been raised and addressed, I would look forward to hearing the rejoinder. And I know that this is a place which encourages active citizenry, so let's get into the meat of the resolution that is before us, sir. Series of questions. I will try to answer some myself and see how we go along. So the first question is why? Why are we doing a district hospital now? I think it's clear. We need to have the room. QEH is being is being filled, and we have to utilize St. Lucie. That's not good enough. Let's create a place. I'm sure the issues with regard to the current geriatric hospital have been examined and stipulated. The question, of course, is why is there need to be a new hospital? I'm sure that's been addressed. Have we looked at expansion of the QEH? Have we looked at expansion of the geriatric? Is it a question of the plant? But these are the questions that I have heard, and I probably haven't heard the response, so I look forward to receiving them, sir. And again, I recognize that I was not here for all. The other question, sir, is where? Why the location at the beautiful Waterford ground, sir? And I'm sure that has been expressed. Centrality of location is good, it's nice and quiet. Hopefully there'll then be a question as to how the grounds are currently being utilized. It may have an impact on certain crop over events. I don't know, sir, but we will see the bases set out and how we do the noise management. Actually, sir, a point aside, there actually was a finding the other day in terms of science that listening to songs on the roadway actually increases blood pressure in terms of location. So I'm sure all that will be mitigated, sir. And sir, coming from my quarter, well aware of that. Sir, the other question, sir, is when? When will this get off of the ground? When will this be started? Because we have these ideas. The question, of course, is to get them. How do you get them done? So you can say a lot of initiatives, but the question is, how do you get them launched? There have been a number of initiatives, and when we have big ticket items, it's always difficult because there's always some level of administration, or you might have rabble noise, there are certain things that may seem to distract from the objective. But the point is, sir, when will the construction begin? When will it be done? Another question then, which derives from that, sir, is why now? So, we all support, we all see the need. The question is, in terms of where we are, we have just come out the estimates, we have heard communication with regard to fiscal space. Why now? Is it mission critical? Is it part of transformation? Does it fall within healthcare and policy? So these are the questions which I'm sure will be answered on rejoinder. Other question, and as somebody likes to say, sir, whenever I like to ask the question, why now? They always say, if not now, when? The other question, sir, is how will it be done? How will we pay for it? We've heard the various statements. I was listening to a rejoinder, my very brother, Senator Nurse, and I'm sure I'll get my fair share. The question is financing. We know we have to do it, so we have to get the money from somewhere. Either grant, either taxes, or we borrow. Three sources, sir. Or we could ask Riri, that would fall under grant. So the question is, how do we get it done? How do we pay for it? But then the answer, which comes from the question is, do we have a choice, Mr. President? Do we have a choice? Because it's okay to sit down and ask all these questions and philosophize. It's all right to philosophize when you don't have to deal with the problem. What, however, I would like to encourage the government to do is they encourage the excellent communication ability that it possesses, that when persons ask these questions, as much as they may seem unreasonable, as much as they may seem repetitious, as much as they may seem without bases, that utilize the skill set within the government to convey the responses. Because I don't think any right-thinking Barbadian would say that we do not need a hospital for our geriatric patients. Persons are entitled, believe it or not, sir, persons are entitled, however, to have their opinion. And we certainly cannot dismiss those questions as much as they may irritate, or in some cases even placate, sir. So for my part, sir, let me be clear. There is support for this resolution. There is support for the resolution on the basis of the social, cultural, and economic situation which is affecting the aged Barbadian populace. There is support for the resolution in recognizing that we have a situation with abandonment of patients that needs to be addressed, especially those who are elderly. There is support for the resolution on the basis that the QEH has been stated not to have the resources to deal with these individuals, and an alternative has to be provided. There is support for the resolution on the basis that certainly better can be done and we can build it. However, we must be careful that in constructing the hospital, that we do not also negate the effort needed to look at the sociological reason as to why we're dealing with this problem. And sir, while I support this resolution, I would, however, encourage active citizenry and responses to questions by those who may not, and by those who seek to question the why, the how, the when, and the where. I thank you, Mr. President, for allowing me my turn. Thank you, sir.
Senator Kevin Hines. Any more speakers? Senator Dr. Mulroney.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and let me thank all of the honourable senators in this chamber that have spoken to this issue and certainly have commended the government on the move for the construction of the new geriatric hospital. Mr. President, I even want to thank those that would have come late to the chamber and therefore would not have heard the fulsome debate that would have taken place prior. And also as well, Mr. President, when I started, I would have indicated that this chamber would have been treated to extensive debates by the Minister for Health and Wellness, Senator Dr. Jerome Walcott, in his delivery on the estimates. We would have had presentations as well by Senator Paris, Senator John King, as well. I believe that Senator Haynes would have also as well alluded to it, and as well as Senator Boyce as well. So the government side has fully represented itself in relation to this matter. But I do appreciate the explanation of the senator indicating that he was not available, did not hear, and therefore the questions and the issues that he raised, I will try to treat with them by repeating myself again, and repeating the arguments and the sentiments that would have been delivered by the government side, as we would have spoken to this. I also want to add, Mr. President, that the government has fulsome communication. If you go to the GIS website, you can get all of the press releases that have been done in relation to this. And I think that most of us would have seen the groundbreaking that took place on March 13th. That was very well publicized across all media in relation to the groundbreaking, and also the announcement by Senator Walcott, who is the Minister for Health and Wellness, that it will take approximately 18 months for the construction. So, and Public Affairs as well would have advertised and promoted, and as well, if Mr. President, who has ears to hear and eyes to see, and perhaps are able to play radios on a consistent basis will then be able to hear the news as well. But, Mr. President, this is a chamber for all, and the government, as I said before, is never afraid to have the necessary engagement and to answer the questions as well. And I also want to note that there was actually a town hall meeting that took place under the aegis of BTII, who was responsible for the execution, in order to also as well hear. And yes, and we were told about it in order to ventilate, in order to be able to ventilate the issue. So we've had quite a bit of ventilation. I also want to indicate, Mr. President, as I said, I will repeat myself again in relation to all of the questions that were asked, because all of them were answered in the context of the discussion. We talked about the why. I went even further than was suggested by Senator Boyce in relation to the issues of QEH, which I did speak to, but also looked at the issue of climate change and the fact that the hospital is within 200 meters of the coast and therefore vulnerable as well to natural disasters, storm surges, etc. I also indicated that we understand as government that this is not the only hospital that is in need of upgrade, but I focused on the fact that the urgency in the context of the geriatric hospital on Bacchus Road is again because of that near issue as well to storm surges, and because the government wants to be assured within the context of a natural disaster or even severe flooding that we are able then to take care of those elderly as well. Again, the question was, well, when? I answered that in terms of the 18 months, the fact that we had the groundbreaking on the 13th as well, the fact that we had announced that it will be done in 2 phases as well. I spoke to that in my presentation. The why now? Government had made this announcement in 2020. We moved over financial years in order to allocate resources. In February of 2022, the government would have voted 1.2 million, I believe, for the geriatric hospital as well. The cost as well, the total cost is also publicly available and would have been spoken to by the Minister of Health, is just over $100 million for the completion for the hospital, for the first phase of the hospital. And the government, through its finances, has voted money to do that, and we have identified BTII as the executioner of the project. This is not to say, Mr. President, that as we build out for the hospital that we may not be required to make sure that we have additional finances, but the government is using current finances in order to be able to upfront the project as well. So that speaks to how we will pay. I believe I would have answered in relation to the communication issues. And I think that I would have answered all of the substantive issues that were raised by Senator Boyce, all of the questions that I've had to repeat. Yes, thank you very much, that I've had to repeat. But I also just want to, as well, again, just to thank the honourable senators that spoke in relation to the importance of the care of our elderly. This is a commitment and a recognition that the government has had, and it is evident, Mr. President, in the rollout of our policies. In my earlier presentation, I've also spoken to the fact, Mr. President, that we fully understand that the building out of a geriatric hospital is but one plank. I spoke as well, Mr. President, to the fact that we will be further building out a community care program where we will be able to identify persons within communities that will be paid a small stipend to help provide additional support. So we're talking about home health, we're talking about community health liaison officers, and then we're also talking about the identification of specific support within communities that would allow the elderly to be able to stay within their homes, because we fully understand that the capacity within built infrastructure will not be able to keep pace. So the government does have and has elaborated a full and rounded policy. I spoke as well, Mr. President, if you would recall, to the fact as well that we're even having discussions in relation to making sure that we have respite care for caregivers, so that when we identify those persons in community who can provide care, that caregivers can have a little bit of a step back, have some time away in order then to be able, to release some of the frustration and some of the angst, that can come in terms of the care of the elderly. And we fully understand that it is a sociocultural challenge that we have to be able to unpack, and that the policies and the full suite of policies, I spoke about the policy as well in terms of elder abuse, and the full range of policies that the Ministry of People's Empowerment will be driving in order to support the Ministry of Health and Wellness in the context of the infrastructure as well. So I did speak to a fulsome government policy in relation to that. Just two other matters, Mr. President, I want to speak to. Senator Dr. Charleston Bradford talked about the issue of entrepreneurship, and also as well to make sure that we do have built out of all of the necessary facilities in terms of the care of the elderly. And I want to be able, Senator Dr. Bradford, to support that. I believe that entrepreneurship is extremely important. There are a number of what we consider elderly people who can still make significant contributions in several areas. The level of knowledge and experience, and it's not only, Mr. President, about people who come with academics, but the experience, the practical experience that elderly people can bring, is really unmatched in many ways. And therefore, this is something that the government fully supports. And we would also as well ask for support from the private sector in order to make sure that they too pay some focus to the continued contribution that elderly can make within workplaces in different spheres, whether they are advisors, etc. And the government has made use of that level of expertise and ongoing support in several areas as well. I also as well want to acknowledge, and I believe the government would support, the suggestion from Senator Dr. Rogers in relation to having a chapel. Mr. President, I believe that's excellent. It's an excellent suggestion and an excellent idea. And certainly, while I cannot speak on the behalf of the Minister for Health and Wellness, I believe it is something, that we can consciously have some discussions on and look to see what can be done, because I too as well believe that this is extremely important if we're talking about building out a fit-for-purpose facility that allows the elderly to be able to age with grace. And the spiritual well-being is certainly one of the important elements of that aging with grace, Mr. President. Mr. President, I believe I would have addressed in large part all of the queries and substantive comments, and as well finally noting that in the context of abuse, that there are different types of abuse that can happen, not only physical, sexual, but as well financial. And I believe the legislation that is being contemplated in relation to elder abuse is intended to make sure that we address the fulsome spectrum of all of those different types of abuse, Mr. President. Mr. President, I therefore beg that the resolution to compulsory acquired by the state the parcel of land situated at Lot 5A, Waterford, in the parish of St. Michael, in this island for a public purpose, namely the construction of a district hospital, be now passed.
The question is that this resolution do not pass. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Order number 2, sir. In the name of the Honourable Leader of the Senate, to move the passing of a resolution to approve in accordance with Section 28C of the Land Acquisition Act, Chapter 2, 28, the sale of a parcel of land, the property of the state, situate at Lot 13, Lower Estate, in the parcel St. Michael in this island, to Egg Strong Holdings Limited, a company incorporated under the Companies Act, Chapter 308.
Senator Dr. Monroe-elect.
Mr. President, I beg that the resolution in accordance with Section 228C of the Land Acquisition Act, Cap 28, the sale of a parcel of land, the property of the state, situate at Lot 13, Lower Estate of the Parish of St. Michael, in this island to Edstrong Holdings Limited, a company incorporated under the Companies Act, Cap 308, be now passed.
Question is that this resolution do not pass. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Who thinks the ayes have it? This resolution is no pass.
Order number 5, sir. In the name of the Honourable Leader of the Senate, to move the passing of a resolution to approve the Public Service General Order 2023.
Senator Cummins.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I rise to seek your permission to treat items number 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 as a cognate debate.
The question is that these resolutions, all relating to the adjustments in emoluments for a range of public officers and other public functionaries, be treated as a cognate debate. Just to remind that all the issues with any of those items will be considered in the debate, but they'll be voted on individually. The question is that orders numbers 5 through 12 be treated as a cognate debate. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. The things the ayes have it. Senator Cummins, please proceed.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and I want to perhaps begin today's debate by recalling something that one of my undergraduate professors at university said to me. He said, if you treat to each subject as an individual subject instead of treating to the course of study overall as a comprehensive body of knowledge, then you will always be at a disadvantage. And so when I approach matters relating to governance, to life, and certainly relating to the Senate, I do tend to treat to what my university public international law university lecturer said to me at the time. And I do ensure that I am comprehensive in my assessment of how one thing connects to the other. And on that basis, Mr. President, I am very clear have just come out of an extensive 3 days, just over the last week, covering the process of estimates of expenditure for the upcoming financial year. The preceding 2 weeks, the other place had an extensive national debate on the estimates, and we had an extensive presentation by a number of ministries on the work that needed to be done by the government of Barbados in the upcoming financial year. And that, in turn, Mr. President, spawned extensive national public debate on the issues of the day. And so on that basis, I am going to be very clear that everyone who has listened to all of those contributions over the last few weeks is in a position to understand the context, therefore, for what my presentation today is going to be. That on the one hand, treats to Barbados's commitment in the items on the order paper at 5 through 10. They are 5 through 12. On public sector salary and wages and allowances increases in the context of my own presentation made during the introduction of the estimates on the Barbados Agenda for Transformation and for Growth. And I am confident, therefore, that many others, by the time I am finished, will say, as I say oftentimes, and I certainly said it as I was preparing for this presentation, I am proud to be a Barbadian. I am proud to be from this country. And I want to begin my contribution today, Mr. President, by speaking first about some basic statistics. I want to use the numbers to explain other numbers. Mr. President, globally, we have seen the international community facing down crises of increasing prices caused by energy increases, and then thereafter the war in Ukraine as a result of the invasion by Russia. You have seen that every country around the globe has seen inflationary pressures that have been affecting people and people through workers. We have seen, Mr. President, that there has been an average decline in real income to workers all across the globe as a result of soaring inflationary pressures. This is not a Barbados conversation. It is not a regional conversation. It is a global conversation. And I want to take just a moment, Mr. President, to share for the benefit of the honourable members what has been happening globally. Mr. President, there is a body of news. We don't only just obviously see what's happening in the news here in Barbados, but globally. And one newspaper talked about, Mr. President, the extent of protests, and the title of the article was "Protests over Food and Fuel Surged in 2022, and the biggest were in Europe." Mr. President, it said, soaring energy prices are driving the current wave of protests globally, in contrast to a decade ago when food prices were to blame. From Italians, Mr. President, to Spain, to the UK, all across the globe, in the Asian region, in the European countries, you are seeing a reaction to persons having their real wages impacted as a result of soaring inflation. And what does that mean in real terms, pun intended? It means that in many instances, workers are seeing between 10% and in some instances 20% of their wages and salaries being taken away from them. Not because someone is increasing taxes, Mr. President, not because there are greater deductions being made by the state, Mr. President, but because money simply is no longer going today as far as it went last year or the year before. People's spending power has been diminished significantly, and all across the globe, that is the reality of workers. But have wages been increasing to match inflation? There was, over the last few years, an extensive debate, certainly among the economists, over should countries, and specifically in the case of Barbados, about what is the benefit of matching inflation with increases in wages and salaries. And you heard a conversation evolving here in Barbados, among others, that you simply, and I think it was one of the few times that the economists converged around a single opinion, you cannot chase inflationary pressures with salary increases. They said it simply could not keep pace. And around the globe, that is what generally appears to have been the case, despite what we are seeing in not just one or two, and I mentioned only 5 countries, but in 148 countries globally, we have seen protests against inflationary pressures. That is no small thing, Mr. President. In the United Nations, the United Nations has 193 members. So if in 193 member countries of the United Nations, over 148 countries are having unrest as a result of inflationary prices, that is a clear indication to those who would wish to make this a Barbados problem, that it is not a Barbados problem, but it is a global problem. And so that is the first thing that I want to raise here. But how have countries been responding to these things, Mr. President? In Europe, you were seeing that there was a survey done on whether or not there was an expectation for increases in prices. Less than 3.4% of entities all across Europe indicated that they were going to have salary increases, less than 3.4%. And so wages remained almost stagnant in many instances. There is a global wage report 2022 to 2023, which was prepared by the International Labour Organization, and it is entitled "The Impact of Inflation and COVID-19 on Wages and Purchasing Power." It mirrors across all of the member states of the United Nations using the Sustainable Development Goals to measure purchasing power and what was happening in country in all of these instances, Mr. President, and the results have been the same. I mentioned earlier that only 3.4% of European countries are expecting to raise salaries in line with inflation. That was also what we are seeing, Mr. President. But what makes me proud to be a Barbadian is that the countries that have seen the same inflationary pressures, the same challenges in terms of what the population is asking for, the small country, 166 square miles, a population of under 300,000, Mr. President. This island, our homeland, I want us to compare ourselves with those who are larger than us in very specific terms, Mr. President. Asian nations globally are the leading countries in the world navigating salary increases. Same inflationary prices that they're facing, same reduced purchasing power for workers. But here's what is happening, and this is what is interesting, Mr. President. Asian nations make up 8 of the top 10 countries in the world who will have a real salary increase. Who are those countries, Mr. President? India, well, I'm going to call just the top 5. India, Vietnam, China, Brazil, and Saudi Arabia. Now, let me break down the numbers a little bit more, Mr. President. The increase in India in salaries is 4.6%. In Vietnam, it's 4.0%. In China, it's 3.8%. In Brazil, it's 3.4%. And in Saudi Arabia, a major oil-producing power, it is 2.3%. Now, I want us to get into actual GDP, Mr. President. The GDP of India is approximately 9.27 trillion. The GDP of Vietnam is 1.0 trillion. The GDP of China is 24.86 trillion. The GDP of Brazil is 3.128 trillion. The GDP of Saudi Arabia is 2.3 trillion. Mr. President, enter Barbados. Barbados' GDP is 3.868 billion, not with a T, with a B, Mr. President. We have before us, Mr. President, a salary increase that is being outlined in these respective resolutions, Mr. President, that is on par with, at a minimum, countries who earn far more than we do and are therefore able to pay far more than we can, but we did it anyway, Mr. President. This is a party for whom people matter. What does this actually mean, Mr. President, in Barbadian terms now? Because a lot of times, and I know people say that we get very defensive sometimes and dismissive sometimes, but we have to be clear, Mr. President. This government has come to office. We have been one of the loudest governments about what we're doing and why we're doing it. We have not hidden the challenges that we are facing. We've come openly each time. And I believe that it was the Honourable Deputy President in her own contribution when we were discussing the estimates that talked about the self-appointed people who function as opposition to this government. And so they create a narrative. And so when we in this Senate in particular, as distinct from the other place, when we speak about government policy, you don't hear that, but you get the sensational headlines that mislead and misguide the Barbadian public. And so we have had to make sure that our voices are heard and that chirping that you hear from us at all times is aggressive and serious about ensuring that the record of this government is kept clear. Because the narrative that has gone out there, especially from the Senate, has been misleading, it has not been fair, and it has not been honest. And so we are committed as a government side to always being in our chair, to ensuring that we are always here sitting on time, present, and serious about doing the people's business, that we are always going to represent the government's interests, and we are always going to represent the people's interests through the implementation of policy. We are not here for games, Mr. President. And so we are punching above our weight globally even in issues relating to salaries, and we are not going to continue because it has happened over time. You know, we wanted to allow all voices to contend, but we realized that all voices were not contending equally. So we have had to raise the volume of ours to ensure that our record is not besmirched because it has been, and that our narrative is not tainted because it has been. And so I want to be very clear, Mr. President, despite the inflationary pressures that we have spoken about, this government has targeted housing solutions, specifically targeting those persons who would not be able to afford mortgages in a commercial sense and walk into a commercial bank ordinarily. So police officers, nurses, and teachers. We have maintained a full complement of staff during the COVID period, Mr. President. Not one worker in the public sector in this country went home because this government was cutting staff during COVID, Mr. President. In fact, we created more employment on a temporary basis to respond to, one, COVID through the COVID unit. We had to be able to do that. And then as a result of the other pressures that were thrown at the government, one, the hurricane, and then the ashfall, we created a temporary provision for that as well. And we know that in a few days, that temporary provision, now 2 years afterwards, will come into a different phase, and we will allow for a transitional order to take place. We introduced the Barbados Optional Savings Scheme, which would have been to create investment opportunities for public officers as well. And you had so many people attempting to dissuade people from investing in government paper or using it as an investment tool as well. But it was something that the government did as well. We increased the loan limit for traveling allowances to persons who were eligible to purchase vehicles. And we ensured, Mr. President, that it included the purchase of electric or hybrid vehicles in order to ensure that people can take their costs down. Because when I started out by saying that the nominal increases in salaries in some instances have not resulted in a real increase in salary because of the dampening pressure of inflation, that is a real thing, Mr. President. And so in order to ensure that we are not just having a single intervention in the market by way of a salary increase, I needed to go back also to point to the record of what we have also done simultaneously to ensure greater purchasing power. We also, Mr. President, and I think we've spoken about this at length over time, and it has also been carried extensively in the press on a monthly basis. You typically will see the published prices also in the Sunday newspapers. Government negotiated a prices compact. I started out, Mr. President, by saying that inflationary pressures were impacting all over the world. In 148 countries, you were seeing protests where people were responding to the inflationary pressures and the impact on food prices. This country, Mr. President, this leadership, the Honourable Prime Minister, and at the time, the Minister with responsibility for commerce, the Honourable Kerry Simmons, would have negotiated the first ever prices compact that ensured that the things that were most commonly purchased by Barbadians were kept at a markup, within markup range, between in some instances 12%, at the highest 15%, to ensure that Barbadians were not in a position where the things that we purchased often were out of reach. But Mr. President, that didn't mean that we had control over the things that were global. And you know, sometimes there's a cynicism about things that you expect people who should know better to be able to do better and to share more on. So when you start to think about first costs, if I'm buying, Mr. President, that can of tuna, I want to make sandwiches for the children to go to school, and I can buy that can of tuna, and I'm accustomed buying that can of tuna in the supermarket, I only see, Mr. President, only see episode 6 in series 2 as to how that can of tuna got onto that shelf. I don't see when it was cleared through the port. I don't see when it was put on a container ship and sent on to Barbados. I don't see when it was procured from a supplier internationally in the first place. And I don't see when the factory and the exporter in the country of origin would have loaded it. So all of those things have costs that are outside of our borders and therefore outside of our control. And when you hear the international community, in particular the international economic community, speaking about inflationary pressures by 400-500% in some instances in terms of shipping costs, all of those are inherent costs that then contribute to the landed cost being higher. From the time that item hits the border of Barbados, this government made a decision: we will take control over the things over which we do have control. And so we capped the shipping rates at 2019 level pre-COVID to ensure that we were able at least to control that part of the cost. We included the things that are popularly used by Barbadians, did surveys to be able to assess what are the items that people typically purchase, and we asked the importers, we can't tell you how much you pay for this in the first place. We know how much you pay for it in the first place, and we know that they are subject to increases. But we don't know, Mr. President, what we do know, what we do have control over, is the question of the cap, the markup, the prices. And so would you agree with us to cap your profit margin? Because really that's what that goes to, your profit margin. So instead of getting a return of $2 on an item that costs $10 or 10 cents on an item that costs $10, you are instead agreeing to get less. But let us understand, because this notion of demonizing capital also is a false notion, and I've said it repeatedly. In order to maintain employment, Mr. President, that profit margin doesn't just go into the hands of those who sit at the top. Supermarkets employ Barbadians who live next door to all of us. They employ people who live in communities like us. And so therefore, we have to ensure that the profit margin still does not result in reduced employment in the same private sector establishments that we are asking to come to the table and hold hands with us. So 12 to 15%, Mr. President, is what they agreed that they could carry without impacting their employment levels or having to send persons home. And we were happy to have been able to negotiate that for 47 items in that basket. The expectation, Mr. President, was that after the first one, there would not be a second one, but yet here we are, and there was a second prices compact that was also then negotiated with the team. We had also, Mr. President, a cap that we negotiated and worked through and brought through to have debate in this honorable chamber on capping of the electricity rate at the VAT on electricity rates for residential consumers. Those are among the measures, Mr. President, that this government has implemented to counteract the effects of inflation and the result on reduced purchasing power for Barbadians. But we've taken it a step further now, Mr. President, with these resolutions before the Honourable Chamber. We have now seen, Mr. President, the government has negotiated for the year 2023 to 2024 a 2% increase in salary. For the year 2024 to 2025, a further 2% increase in salary. And for 2025 to 2026, a 1% increase in salary, thereby resulting in a 5% total increase in salary over 3 years, Mr. President. Secondly, we have seen increases in allowances. This is not something that has been done in the short term. The last time, Mr. President, that we saw an increase in allowances, and I don't want to give the wrong number, the last time we saw an increase in allowances was in a salary accord of April 1st, 2008, and then March 31st, 2010. Let me be clear. The last time that allowances were increased was in 2010. We are now in 2023, Mr. President. The last negotiations on salary increases for public officers took place in 2018. We had a coverage during the period 2018 to 2019, and salaries were increased at that time by 5%. Now in 2023, we have a further 5% increase over 3 years, including increases in allowances, including, even though there's no retroactive pay, a bulk lump sum payment for which only NIS will be deducted in order to ensure that the contributions are covered during that period and it will not be taxable. And on that basis, Mr. President, you also have the normal top-up allowance that goes typically for persons who are pensionable age in order to ensure that they are at par, Mr. President. In terms of allowances, the agreement is that there will be a 10% increase in allowances for the year 2022 to 2023, a 3% increase in allowances for 2023 to 2024, and for 2024 to 2025, a 3% increase, making that a cumulative 16% increase in allowances for a 3-year period, Mr. President. So a 5-year increase in salaries over 5 years, a 3-year increase of allowances amounting to 16%, and we did not stop there, Mr. President. We also agreed that there would be the creation of a number of additional posts, that there would be a number of master teachers for the teaching service, specialist nurses in the healthcare sector, and that there would also be a comprehensive job evaluation and regrading exercise for the public sector to ensure that we are fit for purpose in a modern environment, Mr. President. We've also heard in the budgetary allocations by the Honourable Prime Minister that now to be included in the allowances for travel officers, specifically for nurses, that they too will be eligible for car loans. You have heard that, and that has been expanded also to allow for the electric and the hybrid vehicles. This is a government, Mr. President, that is punching above its weight in a global environment that does not replicate what we have been able to do here in this country. There is no doubt in my mind, Mr. President, that despite very difficult times, there is no doubt in my mind that a country that is spending 12.3% of its GDP on wages and salaries, as outlined before, that this is a country that is committed to its people. This is a country that is committed to working with its public sector, and it is encouraging those employers in the state-owned enterprise. And if you go through the Public Finance Management Act in Schedules 2 and 3, you will see the state-owned enterprises and the commercial state-owned enterprises. And for those state-owned enterprises, Mr. President, where it is dependent on government, central government for financing, these measures today also would apply. And typically for those commercial state-owned enterprises in Schedule 2, where you have collective bargaining agreements, they will go to the table with their labor representatives to ensure that they are also benefiting from the requisite outcome of their own negotiations that will benefit their workers, Mr. President. This is not a small thing. This is not a small thing. And I think that we have to be very clear that there are certain things that a country that is as small as Barbados and does not have the trillions of dollars in GDP that other countries do, still is making the kinds of commitments to expenditure and to development-related expenditure, including people-related expenditure that this government is making. When we were not dealing with the global inflationary pressures, Mr. President, of the COVID-19 pandemic, this was not the government in power. It was before us. Were there salary increases, Mr. President, if I can ask questions of my own? No, there were not, Mr. President. We came into office, and despite the challenges, despite the fiscal challenges that we were dealing with in 2018, and continuing onwards up to 2020 and now in 2023, we made a commitment to serve people, Mr. President. That is what we did then. That is what we will do now. And that is a commitment of this administration for as long as we sit in the office of the government of Barbados, that we will look comprehensively at what needs to be done, that we will look comprehensively at the full landscape of what is happening globally, regionally and locally, but that Barbados will punch above its weight and in some instances even so, do more for its people than those who have far more than we do, Mr. President. And with these few words, having the confidence that an extensive estimates debate and extensive presentations in substantive areas were made just last week in this honorable chamber, 3 weeks before it, continuously in the other place, and plenty of public debates, and our radios were on all the time for the benefit of Senator Boyce. I hope he was able to both be here and there and to hear everything during that time. We are always, of course, amenable to answering any questions, but we want to make sure that everyone is clear that this is stuff that has been put into the public debate, into the public domain, and at all times this government practices transparency. I beg to move, therefore, Mr. President, that this resolution do now pass.
Thank you, Senator Cummings. Any speakers? There being none, I put the questions, starting with order number 5. The question, please.
Mr. President, I beg to move that the Public Service General Order 2023 do now pass.
The question is that the resolution to approve the Public Service General Order 2023 do not pass. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. The ayes have it. This resolution is passed.
Order number 6, sir. In the name of the Honourable Leader of the Senate, to move the passing of a resolution to approve the Public Service Teachers Order 2023.
Senator Cummings.
Mr. President, I beg to move the passing of a resolution to approve the Public Service Teachers Order 2023.
The question is that this resolution to approve the Public Service Teachers Order 2023 do not pass. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. The links, the ayes have it. This resolution is now passed.
Order number 7, sir. In the name of the Honourable Leader of the Senate, to move the passing of a resolution to approve the Public Service Part-Time Officers Order 2023.
Senator Cummings.
Mr. President, I beg to move the passing of a resolution to approve the Public Service Part-Time Officers Order 2023.
The question is that this resolution to approve the Public Service Part-Time Officers Order 2023 do not pass. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. The links, the ayes have it. This resolution is now passed.
Order number 8, sir. In the name of the Honourable Leader of the Senate, to move the passing of a resolution to approve the Senate and House of Assembly Remuneration and Allowances of Members Order 2023.
Senator Cummings.
Mr. President, I beg to move the passing of a resolution to approve the Senate and House of Assembly Remuneration and Allowances of Members Order 2023.
The question is that this resolution to approve the Senate and House of Assembly Remuneration and Allowances of Members Order 2023 do not pass. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. The links, the ayes have it. This resolution is now passed.
Order number 9, sir. In the name of the Honourable Leader of the Senate, to move the passing of a resolution to approve the Ministers and Parliamentary Secretaries Remuneration and Allowances Order 2023.
Senator Cummings.
Mr. President, I beg to move the passing of a resolution to approve the Ministers and Parliamentary Secretaries Remuneration and Allowances Order 2023.
The question is that this resolution to approve the Ministers and Parliamentary Secretaries Remuneration and Allowances Order 2023 do not pass. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. The links, the ayes have it. This resolution is now passed.
Order number 10, sir. In the name of the Honourable Leader of the Senate, to move the passing of a resolution to approve in accordance with Section 3.2 of the President Conditions of Service Act, Chapter 6, the amendment of the schedule to that act by deleting paragraph 1 thereof and substituting paragraph 1 as contained in the schedule to this resolution.
Senator Cummings.
Mr. President, I beg to move the passing of a resolution to approve in accordance with Section 3.2 of the President Conditions of Service Act, Cap 6, the amendment of the schedules to that act by deleting paragraph 1 thereof and substituting paragraph 1 as contained in the schedule to this resolution.
The question is that this resolution relating to amendments to the schedule of the President Conditions of Service Act, Chapter 6, specifically Sections 3, 2, do not pass. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Thanks, the ayes have it. This resolution is no passed.
Order number 11, sir.
Senator Cummings.
In the name of the Honourable Leader of the Senate, to move the passing of a resolution to approve the rates of salaries and allowances applicable to the post of personal assistants to ministers as set out in the schedule.
Senator Cummings.
Mr. President, I beg to move the passing of a resolution to approve the rates and salaries of and allowances applicable to the post of personal assistants to ministers as set out in the schedule.
The question is that this resolution to approve the rates of salaries and allowances applicable to the post of personal assistants to ministers as set out in the schedule do not pass. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Thanks, the ayes have it. This resolution is now passed.
Order number 12, sir. In the name of the Honourable Leader of the Senate, to move the passing of a resolution to approve the rates of salaries and allowances applicable to the post of personal assistant, executive assistant, press secretary, executive personal secretary, and clerical officer to the Prime Minister as set out in the schedule.
Senator Cummings.
Mr. President, I beg to move the passing of a resolution to approve the rates of salaries and allowances applicable to the post of personal assistant, executive assistant, press secretary, executive personal secretary, and clerical officer to the Prime Minister as set out in the schedule.
The question is that this resolution to approve the rates of salaries and allowances applicable to the posts of personal assistant, executive assistant, press secretary, executive personal secretary, and clerical officer to the Prime Minister settled in the appropriate schedule do not pass. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Meeting the ayes have it. This resolution is now passed.
Mr. President, that brings us to the end of government business for the day, and I beg to move that this honourable chamber do now be adjourned sine die.
The question is that the Honourable Senate be now adjourned sine die. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Meeting the ayes have it. The Honourable Senate now stands adjourned sine die.